Hello everyone and welcome to the Hobby Card. In today's video I will talk about the Iron Hands chapter in the Warhammer universe, Warhammer 40,000 universe. And meanwhile I'll be drawing this in the background here. It's a project I've been working on for a very long time now, only because I'm obviously I don't draw nearly as often as I would like, and it's just gonna take me a long while to finish this. And this drawing, I drew inspiration, or it's kind of a scene from a book, or it's inspired of a scene from a book, which is a compilation of short stories of the Horus Heresy called The Keys to Hell. So yeah, in today's video I will, as I said, talk about the Iron Hands chapter. And I don't know how much you know about them or not in the lore. If you are an absolute lore master, you probably know more about them than I do, because 99% of what I have read about the Iron Hands has been because of the Horus Heresy, and I absolutely love this chapter in the Horus Heresy. I strongly consider collecting them in 40k. I don't play Horus Heresy because I am not rich enough. I don't have enough money to play Horus Heresy. Sorry, that's just the truth. If this channel kicks off, I'll probably invest in some Horus Heresy miniatures. But yeah, I guess I can only collect, I suppose, one game mode at the time. Well, that's a lie, because I also got Kill Team. But anyways, I digress. I just really used to like the Iron Hands in the Horus Heresy, and I will go into why in this video. But I would also like to provide some homebrew lore that I think might be interesting going forward for the Iron Hand, sorry, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Iron Hands have been kind of very neglected in the lore, very strongly neglected in the lore. And some people would think that's a bad thing. I certainly don't think it's great. I think they have a lot of potential, but honestly, if they don't know, it's one of those situations where, like, it's one of those chapters where it seems like perhaps GW is not entirely sure as to what to do with them, and in that case, I'd rather they don't do anything with them until they know, they have a clear understanding of what they want this chapter to be in the 41st Millennium, because they do have a clear purpose and personality in the Horus Heresy. And again, some of my favorite characters are from the Horus Heresy. Some of my favorite Warhammer books from the Heresy are, or at least involve heavily, they feature heavily the Iron Hands. And so in today's video, I will address both why I fell in love with them during the Heresy, well, during the era of the Heresy, and also what I think could be done for them in the future. That being said, this is not a video essay. Obviously, it's not like these ideas I have thought them through necessarily with like a lot of depth, and I haven't thought very deeply about many of these things. So if you think they're stupid, or if I make a mistake and I contradict the lore in any way, shape, or form, please let me know in the comments down below. I don't pretend to be this absolute master who has the greatest ideas ever, because you know what? The Warhammer universe is very complex, and it is a lot of different people, a lot of us have spent a lot of time thinking deeply about some of these topics, and perhaps you've thought more deeply about this than I have, so I don't want to step on your toes. Let me know in the comments down below if you like my ideas, or if you can think of any better ones. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the topic of this video while I struggle to create the metal effect that I want on this armor. But anyways, so in the Horus Heresy, the Iron Hands, I thought they're very interesting. I did a video the other day when I was role-playing an Iron Hands in Space Marine 2, or at least trying to. And I basically defined them as in a way, these very cold, calculating, machine-like warriors with anger issues, which is a very interesting contrast. And please let me know if you disagree, but I personally, I just think that kind of sums them up fairly well, and I would like to see more of that. But also, you gotta understand philosophically why the Iron Hands are the way that they are, right? And this is sort of addressed in the Heresy, surprisingly enough, not in a book about the Iron Hands, but in a book called Angel Exterminatus in the Heresy. Completely underappreciated, by the way. I shouldn't say completely. I guess some people appreciate it, but it's one of those like meme books. And that's the thing too about the Iron Hands. A lot of the books that I absolutely love about them, that feature them, at least, are taken as meme books, right? One of them is Angel Exterminatus, and the other one is what was it called? Now I have to figure out. It's the one that takes The Damnation of Pythos. The Damnation of Pythos is such a crazy book. It's kind of taken as to be kind of a silly book, but in many ways it's, I would argue one of the books that made me fall in love the most with the Iron Hands, because it just really portrays them as very complex, psychologically complex characters, right? And I will talk more deeply about The Damnation of Pythos and why it actually is a great book. I realize that may be an uphill battle, but I will die on that hill. At least some parts of the book are great, okay? At least let me have that. If you read The Damnation of Pythos, you know why I'm so giggly about it. It can get very silly at times, but I don't know, maybe it was just the narration that was great, and I just thought the book was better because the narration was so good. Good voice actors do have the ability to make a book seem better than it probably is. Sorry. But yeah, they are just very psychologically complex, right? They have this weird combination of an amazing genius, an incredible proficiency with technology, and just a profound scientific what's it called, understanding of how machines work, and they can accomplish incredible feats of all sorts regarding machines, anything to do with machines. At the same time, they're incredible warriors. They're very fearsome. They're very scary. And they are very insecure about their fleshy parts. And I just find that incredibly, how can I put this? Interesting and sort of relatable in some ways, because I don't want to get too deep into it, but it's almost, it's hard to explain, but I've mentioned before at length that I used to train martial arts, right? And I used to fight and compete in different disciplines back in the day, back when I was a younger lad. And I'd noticed a lot of things while I was training and fighting and going to competitions and so on. And one of the things that I always found interesting was how the more scared you are of fighting and the more insecure you feel about fighting. Well, not everyone, obviously, but some people, me included, I certainly did this when I was feeling like more insecure about fighting. I would, first of all, train harder. That's something that my crew, I guess you could say my coach, ingrained on me. Like, if you are concerned about the fight, don't think about the fight, just think about the training, right? Because you're gonna fight anyways, so you might as well just focus on the training. And I would just train so much harder because I was so scared, not necessarily of getting hurt or injured, but I don't want to get too much into it. But yeah, I was just so scared, especially in my very first fights. Because yeah, I knew I could get hurt or injured, but I also knew that thousands of people were gonna be watching my fights. And back in the day, I had many fans because I had a martial arts YouTube channel. I also had many enemies, and I knew that a lot of people were wishing for me to fail. Why did I have enemies? Well, that's just the nature of the martial arts world. It is extremely toxic and poisonous and full of insecure adults. Also amazing people as well. But my point is, the more insecure I was, the more I would want to change myself, the more flaws I would find within myself. And I was like, I don't know, I would have a sparring session and I was like, oh, I made this mistake, so I have to go back and drill it better. When I'm hitting the bag or when I'm doing drills with a partner or whatever, I gotta drill this mistake out of my system. And that's just something that I always found very relatable about the Iron Hands. They have this kind of aura of superiority over other Space Marine chapters and back in the day legions, but it sort of comes from a profound understanding of how vulnerable they actually are, right? And you cannot really blame them because they come from the world of Medusa, which is pretty much a death world, right? It is a horrible, by all accounts, a horrible place to live in, to grow up in. And as I was saying earlier, in Angel Exterminatus, there is this small passage about young Ferrus Manus when he first arrived on Medusa and how he was like climbing to the surface and just struggling, and it just perfectly depicts the stoicism of Ferrus Manus, which I think is one of the most interesting Primarchs. Unfortunately, he usually gets portrayed as a stupid meathead, and we know more about him from other Primarchs than from depictions of himself in the lore. But anyways, that philosophy of just keep going, of just never giving up, that the Iron Hands in the Heresy had, I think is amazing. And funnily enough, even though the Iron Hands were the first ones to lose their own Primarch during the Heresy, they were probably the ones who got the most devastated during the Heresy, because by the time in the Eastland Dropside Massacre, when the traitor legions, I don't want to bore you with the lore if you already know this, but if you don't, please read the book, the Dropside Massacre. It just came out last year. It's such an amazing book. But anyways, when the traitor legions that were behind the lines of the loyal legions, for those of you who don't know, there was a switcheroo where more than half of the legions that were going to attack the supposed traitors were actually already sided with Horus and the rest of the traitors, right? In the Horus Heresy, at the very start of the Heresy. So, sorry about that. The Iron Hands, the Salamanders, and the Raven Guard, and perhaps the Alpha Legion, more or less, were the only loyalist legions. But the Alpha Legion, the Night Lords, the Death Guard, and the Death Guard were not. They were already declared traitors. The Iron Warriors as well. They were secretly planning to shoot them in the back, basically. But the Iron Hands, led by Ferrus Manus, were at the forefront of the assault. So when the doo-doo hit the fan, they got the worst of it because they were counting on reinforcements from the Salamanders and the Raven Guard, and they, perhaps smartly enough, they just fled and they saved their own legions. But moving on from that, and from then on, during the Heresy, there is this resentment and distrust at the start, at least, of the Heresy by the Iron Hands of the Salamanders and the Raven Guard. And this relationship is also explored in the Damnation of Pythos, actually. And again, I just think it is a very, very complex and interesting relationship that the Iron Hands have with other chapters. But anyways, that's one of the things that I miss from them in 40k. first of all, just how reliable they are, because it's one of the things that immediately becomes clear during the heresy. Not obviously just how angry they are at everyone and at life. It seems like they always were, but even more so after obviously their Primarch dies, because it is like all their vulnerabilities got exposed. Literally the strongest of them, their literal Primarch, their Gene Father, their demigod, basically, their dad, got proven to be weak. And they cannot concede that perhaps there is weakness within them. They are always trying to expunge this weakness from them. And the fact that they are basically faced immediately at the start of the heresy with their greatest fear just throws them makes them become completely psychotic about transforming themselves, right? And there is a lot of developments, there is a lot of tragedy that happens. The Iron Hands, basically, I don't want to go too much into the heresy, because the idea is to eventually talk more about 40k itself. But the Iron Fathers and the Council of Iron Fathers, I forget what it's called. Basically, some of them wanted the remaining of the Legion to go one way, to become a certain type of Legion, or broken Legion. And this amazing other character, Iron Father, wanted it to go the other way, a lot more wholesome way, perhaps, a lot smarter, more noble way, at the very least. But yeah, the Iron Fathers, the rest of the Iron Fathers won that battle, so to speak, ideological battle. And then we have the Iron Hands that we have today, which are basically kind of meh. Like, they seem to be... I've heard other people describe them as just lapdogs of the Mechanicus. And I am currently reading the first book that I've read of them in the 41st Millennium in 40k. That is, to me, like, that is not in the Heresy. And they are incredibly cool in this book. But I don't see them being like... I don't understand this whole lapdogs of the Mechanicus thing. But I have heard, I haven't personally read this, but I have heard of other instances in the lore where they will just be dicks to other chapters, right? Like, they will steal a dreadnought from another chapter, or kidnap a dreadnought ancient from another chapter, just so that they can use it themselves, because they're just so obsessed with machines. And I think that's cool. That has the potential to be very cool and grimdark and whatever, but that needs a very good explanation of being, right? Because we are talking about an extremely methodical and calculating chapter, so they need a good excuse for everything that they do. Whereas more often than not, at least the perspective that people had of them is like they're actually kind of dumb, which I think is an incredible scene. You cannot have an entire legion that is obsessed with weakness and with becoming more machine-like be dumb. They should be the smartest. They should be smarter than the Ultramarines, for example, right? The Ultramarines are normally regarded as being like the overachievers, like the vanilla Marines, so to speak, and kind of nerds about stuff, really. Well, the Iron Hands should be the biggest nerds. They should be the smartest of, at least of the original Space Marine chapters, of the first founding chapters. They should be the smartest of them, because they have literal machine parts in their brain. Now, I said smartest, not wisest, okay? And there is an important difference here. These are not philosophical people. They have one philosophy, and that is to expunge the weakness of the flesh from their being, to see how far they can transform themselves before turning into to see how far they can stretch the definition of humanity before turning into something else. And in this short story here that I'm drawing, at least where I drew the inspiration from for this drawing here, that's exactly what happens. So in a way, that is very philosophical and very interesting, right? Because even in the book that I'm reading now, and also in the Heresy as well, they wonder like how much of me is still human, right? How much of humanity do I actually need? How much of what makes me human should I keep? And at some point, an Iron Hands even compares himself to someone mutated by chaos, and he acknowledges immediately that he feels embarrassed by even thinking those thoughts. But he's like, well, just as he's committed to chaos and he has mutated himself so much and become so gross and debased, haven't I done the same? I don't even know where my body ends and my armor begins. I have entire organ systems that are just machines, and the ones that are not are more likely than not just fat grown, just to be more efficient. They have a very interesting ship of Theseus. Wait, is that what it's called? Yep, that's what it's called. A very interesting ship of Theseus paradox going on with themselves, right? Whereas if you don't know, the paradox of the ship of Theseus is, well, let's say you have the ship. That is the ship of Theseus or Theseus or Teseo. And let's say that you need to replace a plank off of it because it broke. So you get a new plank. But then a few years down the line, more planks are falling off. So you get new planks, and you start replacing each part that needs maintenance, right? At some point, you just got to replace the parts. But if you do that over and over and over again, eventually, none of the original parts will remain. And eventually, none of the original replacements even will remain if you do that over and over and over again. So what remains? And that just has a very, like an interesting potential, I believe, narrative potential for the Iron Hands. And I think that should be explored. But let's talk a bit more about their gimmick, right? Because yes, we know, okay, Warhammer, Black Library and Warhammer and everything, they, unfortunately, I think, and I've said this before, the universe itself, the setting itself, has the potential to be a narrative goldmine of just literature and again, narration and stories, and just potentially it can be the richest universe narratively, right? But also it sometimes can be extremely goofy and extremely silly and extremely repetitive, right? As an example, the Space Wolves. What's their whole deal? Well, they really, really, really like wolves. They're really into wolves. Now, that's an unfair... that's unfair for me to say because I absolutely despise the Space Wolves. So let me talk about one of the chapters that I really like. The Blood Angels. I love the Blood Angels, right? Well, what's their whole deal? They're really, really, really into blood. And everything with the Blood Angels has to do with blood. And they have chalices, and somehow it's supposed to be a secret that they really like blood, when everything about them it just is blood themed, right? That's just another example. And the White Scars, what's the whole deal? Well, they really, 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 really like to go fast. They love speed. And then that gets overplayed. In the better novels, however, all of these factions that I'm talking about have characters that represent the best of them. They represent a narrative that is treated with maturity and respect, and it is very rich and interesting, and I just hope that the Iron Hands could get some more of that treatment. Now, this is what I propose. This is just one of my many propositions. How to treat the Iron Hands going forward, not only narratively, but also in the lore. And I will be basing off, I'm not like changing them, I am basing this idea that I have of them on stuff that's already out there, right? Of examples in the lore. And I'm just basically taking them to a whole new level, right? Where they can actually perhaps even become one, if they ever get their own codex again in the tabletop, they can actually become like a, what's it called? A faction rule, even, right? What if the Iron Hands, again, one of the, this is, I'm not just pulling these out of my wizard hat. One of the things I really like about them is that whenever they lose, whenever they seem to be defeated, it's almost like they don't understand why. And I really like that, because it's like, hey, we are the most perfectionist chapter in the sense that, yes, even more than the Ultramarines, in the sense that we are constantly looking out for weaknesses within ourselves and within our chapter. And as I said, we're constantly expunging it. So, what if we turn that into both a tabletop rule, a faction rule, and could be considered a faction rule? I guess so, yeah. And a more interesting gimmick than what they already have, than it's just like, oh, the flesh is weak. What if every time an Iron Hand faces an enemy, as soon as it becomes clear that they might lose, as soon as the battle becomes hopeless, or Emperor forbid, they actually lose and they get their mechanical asses kicked, they just retreat, tactical retreat, no matter what. This is not a noble chapter in the traditional sense of the world. They're noble in the sense that, well, they're still the Emperor's Angels of Death and they're still the protectors of humanity, but at the same time, they make cold, calculated sacrifices if they have to, and that should almost be their doctrine. And there should be exceptions to this doctrine, but those exceptions, will carry so much more weight if that is their doctrine, right? Like, as soon as it becomes clear that you're gonna lose, get the hell out of there. And if you have to leave Space Marines behind, you gotta leave them. Try to secure as much of the technology that you can, but you gotta make sacrifices, because we already ran this calculation in our brains, because we don't need computer, because our brains are the computers, right? To an extent, like the Iron Fathers could use that and could ingrain that philosophy into the neophytes, the Iron Hands neophytes. So, just as a start, I think that could be very interesting, and you could lower their battle shock threshold in the tabletop, right? Maybe they get battle shock more easily, not because they're actually shocked, but because as soon as a squad or a unit, I guess, gets hit and they start to lose models in that unit, as soon as it becomes clear, like, oh, these guys are gonna they're gonna beat us, they run out of there, right? But let's take it a bit further. Let's make it a bit more interesting. My Iron Hands, hypothetically, are not only gonna run from the fight if they have to, if it is the tactically sound thing to do, but again, they would never fight just for the fun of fighting, right? This is not a fun chapter. They're not whimsical. Again, they can be very fun. There's very comedic moments of them in the lore, but it is almost usually at their expense. And if it's not, it's almost unintentional comedy, and that's what makes it even more funny, because these guys don't, for the most part, have a sense of humor. And they can even be cute sometimes. One of my favorite characters in the Heresy is, his name is Henricus. He's an Iron Hands. And my name is Hendrik, so I like his name, obviously. But there's this part where, like, I think it's in the White Scars book. I don't remember exactly which one. But he's just compulsively working on repairing a ship. And I don't want to spoil too much. But again, I might be misremembering this. Again, we're talking about dozens of books that I read of the Heresy. But someone is like, hey man, you should slow down there. Like, you don't have to work so hard. And eventually he just understands, like, oh, you're just obsessed with this because you're very sad. And he's like, what? No, I'm not sad. No, you're sad. Let me here with my wrenches and my gears. Who cares? And it's kind of cute to think of this machine, cyborg, superhuman, transhuman, space warrior, angel of death, soldier, just like actually dealing with being extremely sad and extremely heartbroken over the loss of someone that he loved, and how he can't. That's something, since it is something he cannot quantify. It's not something he can calculate. Well, he's still human. He has 2 human hearts, maybe, or at least he had at some point. He now has to deal with his emotions, right? And he's repairing the ship or whatever he's repairing because he cannot repair himself anymore because he's broken from the inside. So I think that's cute. But again, I don't think that sort of things should be overplayed, because then it would lose its value. I think it should be very sporadically used. But as I was saying, what if we don't just stop there? Let's make it a bit more interesting. Yes, the units will flee combat, but as I said earlier, they don't fight when without reason, right? Whenever an Iron Hands goes into battle, an Iron Hands force goes into battle, perhaps an Iron Father or their commanding officer or just whoever's in charge of them already decided that they have to win that battle, that they have to risk the losses and whatever in order to carry on that attack or whatever is going on, right? So what do they do when they fall back? Well, they very quickly, because remember, in my headcanon, these are the smartest Space Marines. Again, not the wisest, not the most emotionally intelligent, perhaps, or socially, but the smartest ones. Perhaps intellectually, let's say. So they go back to the shop and they immediately analyze, okay, what went wrong there? Why did we lose if we had already calculated, made all the calculations, and we should have won? So what went wrong? And just as when I was scared of an upcoming fight and I noticed a weakness in sparring, and I would go back to the gym that same day or the next day or whatever, no matter how tired I was, and I would certainly overtrain at times, and I would drill it out of my system, drill my weakness out of my system if I could. They are gonna modify their weakness out of their system, and I'm talking replacing parts of themselves that maybe they had already replaced before. Like, oh no, my favorite bionic arm was not strong enough because perhaps it's more focused on, my calibration is more focused on controlling the recoil of fire instead of the amount of firepower that I get produced. And maybe I was calibrated for more precise shots. Well, I'm going to build myself a new arm. I'm going to change some parts quickly, almost like battlefield repairs. And I'm going to focus more on the amount of firepower. Let's say more quantity over quality, right? And so, and again, this is what I think, why I feel that, let me know if you think I'm wrong, obviously. But this is why I feel like this has not only narrative potential, but also tabletop potential. And so whenever they flee, when they come back to the fight, they come back stronger. They come back, better adapted to fight the enemy that made them flee in the first place. So they basically become your worst nightmare, and they kind of become it becomes a priority for their enemies to exterminate all of them. If you're going to attack an Iron Hands unit, you have to exterminate all of them, because if one survives, he's going to go back and he's going to teach all the other Iron Hands little roachlings what he knows, or ants. I don't know what a good analogy with bugs would be, but anyways. And they're going to come back harder and stronger against you, so do not let them survive. And that makes them incredibly scary, but also not overpowered, right? Because again, they had to flee in the first place. And I think it allows them to have enough vulnerability, both in the tabletop and in the lore, that they remain interesting and that they're not overpowered, but enough complexity of character and enough virtues, because again, not everyone, not any space marine can do that, right? Perhaps even the smartest ones, even as an ultramarine, would like go into a fight, lose, and then he has to go back and read his stupid books and learn about history or whatever they do, and read the Codex Astartes, and just think of a new way to win based off of the book. But again, that takes time. That's something the Iron Hands don't need to do, because literally as they're running away from the fight, they can run these calculations and they're thinking what went wrong, because they are obsessed because of all the trauma that's ingrained in their literal gene seeds, because of all the trauma that they went through in the Heresy. First of all, they were always a very traumatized legion, but now that they're just a chapter, they carry over all this trauma from the Heresy, just like the Blood Angels do. But how come the Blood Angels get to be cool because of their trauma and the Iron Hands don't? Well, I want them to be cool from now on. And again, I don't even collect Iron Hands, right? I only have this. I have it here from that other video. You can't really see it because my webcam is not made for this. But this one that I kit bashed from the... This is my only Iron Hands character that I've ever made. But I kit bashed the hell out of it. And I put... Again, you can't really see it. But it was very hard because I used a bunch of stuff that was not cables and hoses from other miniatures that I made them sort of look like cables and hoses. And I put them into his torso, and I changed the head. I chopped a part of the head, and I put some cybernetics in there. Again, it's kind of a tragedy that you can see it, because I think it looks very cool, and it will look even cooler once I finally paint him. But anyways, that's my idea of the Iron Hands. Like this, like very grimdark chapter. Sure, they're very insecure of their humanity, but they just become stronger because of it, and they're very psychopathic. And again, it's perhaps not the wisest thing to be, but who cares? It's the 41st millennium. There is only war. Might is right. And, you know, history is written by the winners, right? So they only care about winning. So they're going to modify whatever they have to modify. And while the ultramarine nerds have to go back and study their books or go back to their training cages and you know, just train differently, or I don't know, whatever those nerds do, this particular brand of autistic nerd, unlike the other particular brand of autistic nerd, what they do is they just do battlefield repairs. They recalibrate their mechanical parts, whatever they need to get back in the fight and actually win this time. So I think that's a cool way to make them a very scary chapter, and also very interesting. It allows them to have dignity in the lore. And yeah, I just like the idea that from their point of view, whenever they go into any sort of conflict, they already ran all the calculations and already decided that they can win, and that there's a good reason for it, whatever. Even when they do like ugly things, right? Like steal another chapter's dreadnought. I really want to think that in their computer heads, they have a great reason for it, right? And I just think that makes them spicy and interesting. And yeah, I think I think that's all for this video. As a quick aside, just before I end, and I do apologize for the long video, but I do like to yap a lot. I really like the effect that I made here on the armor, more so than the effect that I was doing on the other. You can tell that I tried like a bunch of different techniques, because again, I am not a professional artist. I am literally learning as I go. And let me open up something here real quick, and this is relevant to the video. Let me open up another project. Yes, why not? So I learned this. This is gonna be eventually my channel logo, right? And I've been working on this for the past couple of months. And I literally figured out how to do that technique that I'm using for my Iron Hands drawing that I started like 6 months ago now. By just trying out these other drawings, so literal trial and error, and perhaps that is one of the reasons why I like my own idea of the Iron Hands, just trying stuff and seeing what doesn't work, and then just going back to the planning board and erasing stuff, and starting from scratch. But yeah, I could honestly talk about this for days. I love Warhammer lore. I have something to say about almost anything regarding the Space Marines, because I think they have a lot of narrative potential, and I find them very interesting narratively. But now I would like to know what you think. What you think about my ideas. Let me know in the comments down below. If there's if you thought of something better, if you like what I said, if you don't like what I said, just whatever it is, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Like this video and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more content like this. Ad Astra, and remember, there are no female custodies. Until the next one.